Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Hungry for Knowledge. I'm Yuuki. I'm a Kaimanu VTuber who streams here on Twitch, and all the ones pop up on YouTube if you haven't seen me before. Today I am joined by the Vtuber Journalists themselves, Ducky VT.
That's me. Hello. And I can't believe I have the prefix of the VTuber Journalist and not just a VTuber Journalist. So that's a nice honor, I guess.
I just deferred to you as that because I feel like there's nobody else out there that like refers to them as the VTuber Journalist, if you will. Like there's reporters out there, there's like drama tubers, there's all that kind of stuff, but nobody like directly says I'm a journalist, I feel like, anymore. I feel like you're the only time that I've ever actually seen journalist attached to a name, if you will.
I mean, I'm gonna it's a badge for me. Like, it is like a title, and what I do is like journalism. And I mean, I've been doing this for years and years now. So sometimes I'll say like I'm a reporter, sometimes I'll say I'm a columnist, but like all of that is just like synonyms for journalist, right? Like it's all kind of the same deal.
It's kind of the same effect as like, to the same effect as like Phoenix Wright walking around with his lawyer badge, if you will. But I will let Ducky introduce himself first before we get into the questions.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my name's Ducky. I'm a journalist. I have been covering VTubers, I guess, for 2 years now. I've been in the broader gaming and esports space for more than 5, and I've been a journalist in total for 7 years. I guess I am now an anime boy online. A lot of my passion for writing kind of comes through just liking telling stories. I've written for some like major outlets. You might have seen me on like Vshojo. That's my like old stomping ground. Vtuber Newsdrop is obviously where I do quite a lot of my VTuber content, but I've also written for like major publications here in Australia that are like major mastheads and all that kind of stuff, and some other big esports and gaming sites like Kotaku, Esports, etc.
Damn, that's a lot to put under your name. It's sick as hell, honestly. This is why I'm like sitting here in awe and I have like secondhand nervousness. You sit there and you're so humble, and I'm like, I'm just a funny dog.
I mean, once upon a time, all I was just like someone who really liked sport and like then also really liked esports, and I was like, hey, what can I do to be a part of this world? And it's like, I can write. That's what I'm good at.
No, it's sick as hell. I don't think I remembered to put this in the actual script. But were you one of the founding members of VTuber Newsdrop, or were you just one of the first people that wrote for it?
So no, I wasn't a founding member of VTuber Newsdrop. I was the first member they brought on board after the founding team. So VTuber Newsdrop was like the origins is like a little bit like messy, but basically it was a project launched by 2 journos, Jay and Teddy, who I work with, plus Kawa, to kind of bring more news into the VTuber space. Kawa being the VTuber agency. VTuber Newsdrop has always been pretty independent. It is now fully independent of Kawa. And I am the third kind of staffer, quote unquote. None of us get paid, it's all volunteer. And like the 3 of us are basically Newsdrop now.
That's cool as hell. I actually didn't know that Kawa was like part of the founding of Newsdrop. I actually had no idea. So yeah, that is news to me. I wasn't paying attention very well, apparently.
Yeah, so like it was the handle used to be like news.kawaentertainment.com. Like that used to be like the website tag.
Gotcha.
Now it's like we have like the VTuber Newsdrop domain. But yeah, Newsdrop's coming up on 1 year now. So like I think it maybe just past 1 year. So it's been yeah, it's been very interesting. I haven't been part of it for all that time, but yeah, it has been a very reliable and trustworthy source and a very good source of information in the VTuber community across that time, and that's ultimately why I chose to join.
Yeah, no, it's so cool. I honestly need to actually like get it subscribed to my VTuber email just so that I can like
Mm,
keep up with it cuz I've been trying to pay attention when I was gathering resources for this episode cuz I wanted to get like um a listing of all of your articles so I can just kind of specifically pop over. So I actually right
that's
now
a long list. It's a long
I
list of
literally
articles.
have so obviously I don't have every single one because I don't have the some of the Australian stuff that you do, but I literally have like your name um, or your little list of articles that you've done for Dexerto and Newsdrop right on my other screen right now, just so I can kind of skim it real fast. But it
Yes.
you're not wrong. It's not a short list.
I'm trying to run through my head how many I've published overall, and I would be close to 5,000 articles across my life as a journo.
Holy crap.
Um, yeah, so at Vshojo alone, it's nearly 3,000. And then like bits and bobs around the place, VTuber Newsdrop, all my freelance work, etc., etc. It's above 4,000, and it would be getting closer and closer, kind of every week to 5,000.
Yeah, and I mean with Dexerto, you're not only doing the VTuber stuff, but you're just doing a little bit of everything, which is what I was like skimming through, and I'm like, oh, I thought
But
you were like the VTuber news guy, and that was it. But no, it's like Rainbow
those are all
Six
the
League.
it's funny. Those are like the like so like if you like refresh my author page, like
Hmm.
you'll see like oh like I'm writing like Honkai articles and stuff like that. Like those are all the
Yeah,
evergreens that I was the first person to write. They're now updated by other staff. Like I'm not I just still have the byline on them. But like yeah, VTube is only like a very small sliver of my career. Like I for the longest time, and I still am, I still see myself more as like an esports journalist and like a games journalist versus like a VTuber journalist.
you're just the only one who has the title, and I want to slap that badge on you right now and be like, nope, nobody else will ever be the VTuber journalist. Ducky coined it, so nope,
I guess
sorry.
so. I guess so.
So, question just I these are all questions that are just like popping into my head now, and I don't think I actually
Mm,
wrote them down.
that's
Um,
fine.
but
That's the joy of interviewing is you kind of just go with the flow.
with journalism in of itself, with like all those little mini articles that you do, in my experience, we've had jobs that are reminiscent of like a construction bid, if you will, where like it's whoever gets on it first gets the paycheck. Is that kind of what you see in the overall journalist spectrum as well? Or is that just something else
Like
entirely?
in terms of like being the first to like an article and like trying to get like SEO value versus other publications, or like are you talking like internally within a company where it's like, oh, this thing popped up, I'm gonna do it because I was here first.
Yeah, so I'll outline myself a little bit better. So
Mm,
when I used to work conventions, Yuuki lore drop, my SO at the time, the boss for like our little art team would like be like, oh, we need specifically art of this character, and then whoever gets in there first with that art gets the money. That kind of idea. That's kind of what I was trying to
right.
understand. Like, if
Okay.
there's three of you that get there, but you were the first one, who gets the
Okay.
paycheck?
Okay. So like it varies. So like I'll answer this on both fronts because there is like a two
Hmm.
tier to this. It's like obviously when you work for a publication, you want to beat out all the other publications on SEO. You want to be there first. You want to be the best. You want to rank best. You want to make sure that you have all that kind of stuff. So when I was editor, like managing editor at Vshojo, we would like try to, produce content that beat out our rivals. Like we wanted to beat Dot Esports, we wanted to beat Kotaku, etc. And so that plays an element to it. But internally within a publication, it's very different because
Gotcha.
some places you're salaried. I was
Hmm.
salaried at Desherto for 3.5 years, no longer. And some places you're freelance, so you get paid per article. When you're salaried, there's a lot less like scrambling for
Yeah.
like getting that piece and getting that commission. You just give it to the writer who has the best skills, who will be able to knock out the article as quickly as possible to as high as quality of a standard as you want. And so at Vshojo, when I was editor, a lot of that was like gearing articles towards my team's strengths. And so like I would handle like League of Legends content, I would handle esports content, I would handle VTuber content even before I was the Vtuber journalist. And then other people would handle other parts of streaming. They would handle Overwatch and COD and all those kinds of games. So you really get into the subject matter expertise, and I think that makes a better product overall. If you're a freelance writer, which I also have been at a publication, it is a very different field where you do have to kind of be the first, or you have to kind of be early and be like and pitch things and like be there before anyone else is. But at the same time, it's not like, oh, they got it, like it's over for us. I've always seen it as the publication first versus like any kind of writing merit.
Gotcha. I was kind of trying to get an idea of the job in of itself, if you will, because I've never obviously had the opportunity to talk to somebody who's been in the field before. So I wanted to kind of try and understand how competitive it really is, and the level
Okay.
and the expectations in of itself.
I mean, it's different from publication to publication, right? Like some publications, like they're just like Newsdrop, for example, is just three friends or three acquaintances having like fun and like just wanting
Hmm.
to tell stories. That's what VTuber Newsdrop is. None of us do it full time. All of us do it out of the passion. None of us get paid.
Gotcha.
And that's a case of whenever someone has time and they have the inclination to write an article, they can go and do it. There could be news that drops. It could be the most groundbreaking news, but if none of us are in a capacity to write it, it's no harm, no foul if we don't get it. When you're in like I guess my best example of this was Vshojo, because I was there for 3.5 years full time. I've just passed my 4-year anniversary technically because I'm still freelance there. Um, I went from junior writer to senior writer to weekend editor to managing editor. So I went from the bottom of the food chain to the very top. And that is always very different where like you do have article quotas and we have style guides and limits and quality standards and accountability and all that kind of stuff. There's social media sides of it, and Vshojo is like a massive, massive brand when it comes to gaming news. Like it's got millions and millions of followers across all the social media channels. It is got more than 20 million monthly readers. Like it is like a huge, huge website. And there's a lot of pressure that comes with that, and there's a lot of professionalism that comes with that you maybe wouldn't get at a different publication. And so like when on the day-to-days working there, it's like, you're looking for articles online, you're doing interviews if like you have the time and the resources and like the inclination and the contacts and all that kind of stuff. That's all kind of complicated. But you're kind of just day in, day out working, finding like content, new ways to dress it up. You're looking for like what are the trends, what are people talking about. And so it's actually quite what I found was for someone like me, it was a very rewarding field where there was always something new every day. It was very fast paced. There was always work to do, which are all really good things for someone like me because I really enjoy being busy. And some days would be quieter. Like some days you would only get to like 2-3 articles across like an 8-hour like working day. The most articles I ever wrote in one day was 12.
Damn.
12 articles over 8 hours. And I got to more than 10 articles over 8 hours 3 times while I was at Vshojo, which was, I still think, a near record for the company, which is funny. But like some days are just busy, and some days are just quiet, and you get a very interesting match of content when you work in like a news publication where like some places you'll have your own beat. Like you'll be like, I guess in like traditional news, they'll be like, oh, I'm a political reporter, I'm a crime reporter, I'm a court reporter. In gaming and esports, that's and in streaming, it's like, oh, I report on these streamers, or I report on League of Legends versus like another guy who specializes in Overwatch. Like, you know, that's the kind of the nature of journalism, I guess, and games journalism as a whole.
Hell yeah. It's nice to actually get an eye in there, because obviously, like I said, I don't feel like we hear people talk about the inside of news publications, especially online
No,
news publications, very often
no,
at all. And I don't know
no.
if that's for a specific reason or if it's just happenstantial, but I like getting the opportunity to hear it all.
I would like to say it's probably there is like a bit of both playing. Not to dwell on this too much. Like
Yeah,
part of it would 100% be like Gamergate.
gotcha.
Especially when it comes to games journalism, is like the fallout of Gamergate made a lot of games journalists very closely guarded, and not necessarily comfortable, because obviously there was a lot of harassment across that time towards journalists in specific publications, and that still exists. Um, and then I guess the other part of it is that I don't think like the people who like games journalism is a very transitory industry. There's not many people who are like, I do games journalism for a decade. Like
Yeah.
there's people who maybe do it for like 1 to 2 years while they're in college and then they go get a quote unquote real job.
Yeah.
So like you don't necessarily get that level of insight from that time. Versus someone like me who's been a journalist for 7 years now and counting is like those are the kinds of people that you'll have speaking out on the space and what it's actually like.
Gotcha. No, that makes a lot of sense, because you don't just want to chuck out information when you don't feel like you're fully knowledgeable enough to kind of talk about it. And
Yeah.
that's what makes it so different for you as opposed to someone who just interned for a year or what have you.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I like that. I like hearing that. This is exciting. We kind of skipped over the icebreaker because I got so into it. But I wanna ask you this too, because I asked Spiro, because I think
Yeah.
it's really fun.
Great friend. Love Hero.
What is your least favorite reference of Australia or Australians themselves in international media? I just really want to hear.
I mean, like for me, it's funny because I've been working on like an interview series that's coming out soon, with Australian VTubers, and this is a question very similar to a question that I actually ask. And the funny thing is for myself, I don't really have one. Like, this comes from the fact that I just have zero pop culture references. Like, I don't watch any media, like no TV, no movies. I'll dabble in anime and manga, and obviously I play like a few games here and there, but like, I'm not out here playing Starfield right now. I'm still
Yeah.
like, I'm grinding Apex because like, I play competitive games, and I've played like 12 years of League of Legends and then like 4 years of Apex, and it basically takes up all my time. So I don't really have one. I guess like a lot of it, I guess, is funny from like being an Australian online is just like how little people know about Australia. And like, I get it. We're a country of 25 million that you don't have to deal a lot with, and
Yeah.
like we're not like a economic superpower that like the EU is or the US is, and like, you know, so like Australia in the whole scheme of things, we're very very tiny. But what that leads to is some funny moments where like people are like, "Wait, you guys do that in Australia?" Or like, "Wait, you like this is like this is what happens in Australia?" It's just like, yeah, that's just our lives. It's a very different. As much as like Australia is tied in with Western culture and like US and EU culture, it's etc. We do things very differently. Mostly just because of the fact that we are so far away from everyone else.
I always want to, I felt like it was really necessary to ask, because I made the joke with Fira last week too, that it's like the shrimp on the bobby thing. It's like everybody's like, oh, that's
don't
the
have shrimp.
Australian phrase. And Fira was
We
like,
don't have shrimp.
you don't even have shrimp over there, so how can we say shrimp on the bobby?
It's a prawn on the barbie. That's what we have. We have prawns. That's what we have. And it's like funny little things like that that are like funny, haha. I can't really pull any off the top of my head, to be honest. But like there are so many misconceptions people have about Australia that just come up in conversation, and then you're like, huh, we do things a little differently here.
And it's like I really feel like people don't understand how just like normal it is. Yes, you guys have different animals that you really only see over there, or you quote
Yep.
unquote have like the most
We
poisonous things over there
I mean,
that
we have
like
the most biodiversity in the world, like
exactly.
as a country.
So it's like there's some cool stuff over there that's different that I feel like is more known across the world, but then we have silly things like Outback Steakhouse that everybody's like, "Oh yeah, this is what
This is true
Australia's really
Australia.
like."
Uh, in Australia, we don't have blooming onions. I'm just saying that, like, flat out. There is no blooming onions in Australia. What the fuck is that abomination? Actually, it's not really an abomination. It's just onion rings on steroids, and I'm kind of down for that.
I respect it. It tastes
Yeah,
good, but like also what does that have to do with Australia?
I think it's just because it's like meat. Oh, the Australians have meat. That's like, we have all that stuff. Yeah, I don't. It's just funny because like we do like live just very differently to the rest of the world. A lot of that is just due to the fact that we're isolated. And like I've traveled a lot. Thanks to my work. Done the States, done Canada, done a lot of Asia. And it's just like there is truly no place in the world like Australia. It's so like it's got that kind of deja vu sense of like this feels awfully familiar if you're from outside of Australia, but then it's also like it's entirely own beast. And it is a very, very nice place for that reason. But it does also lead to a lot of people just like making some wild assumptions that that whenever like you say them to an Australian, it's kind of like, huh? What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's funny. I just really like having, and this is why whenever I have the opportunity to get people from the other sides of the country or what have you, like I really want to absorb as much quote unquote culture as I can because I'm going to be honest, in America, I feel like we meme on other cultures more than we try and learn. Like, oh, exactly like I said last week with Firo with the like shrimp on the bobby, crocodile Dundee, Steve
Yep.
Irwin's your president, all that stuff kind of
We don't
thing.
have a president.
But Steve
We don't
Irwin's
have
the
presidents.
honorary president.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and even like Australia suffers with the same problem, like internally as well. Like we are a very, very multicultural nation, like one of the most multicultural nations in the world, based off like per capita, of people who are immigrants or like people who are like first or second generation. Um, but it's very that we do struggle a lot with like culture shock, racism, xenophobia, etc. In the same way that you'll probably see in a lot of Western nations nowadays. And but Australia itself as well as a place is very diverse. I grew up on one side of the country, very far away from everyone else, because I grew up in WA, which is on the west coast and is the most isolated city in the world. And then moved to the East Coast recently. And like even that's like a culture shock. Like it's
Yeah.
similar, but it's different. Like, and it would be the same for someone moving from LA to New York, for example. Like they're similar, but they're different.
I think it kind of goes along with something Firo said last week too, where like somebody made the joke of like, is there nothing around you kind of thing? Like everywhere is supposedly everywhere except for like the major cities that like the rest of the world knows about are apparently just the outback and there's just nothing around it except for wild
Yeah.
animals and the country.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
it's all a learning curve.
Australia is the like on landmass is basically the same size as the continental US, and has 8% of the people. So it's like literally the same size as America, but with like 1/10 of the population. So like if you can imagine that, that's how much open like space that we have. It just dotted around that is like not inhabited or completely uninhabitable.
I think a good example that I personally got from media was there were these two brothers that made a lot of comedy videos.
Mm.
I think it was called. I want to say their last name was like Fairbairn or something like that. And
Oh
like
yeah, Fairbairn Films. Yeah,
I always used to see like the outside of their house and like they would just go miles and there's just like nothing there and they would just be
yeah,
memeing out in a field somewhere where there's just
yep,
nothing.
yeah,
So it's interesting to see the different sides, even the dualities of what a city looks like there and what like the country looks like there. So
yeah.
it's a
It's a
lot
lot
of
more
fun.
green here. It's a lot more nature here. I like that.
I respect that because I feel like we're, if not slowly, I feel like almost quickly now, kind of just killing off the nature around us because we want to make technological advancement instead of
Hmm.
kind of revitalizing nature and
We build
enjoying
out, we
what we
don't
have
build up.
around me. Yeah, exactly. Which if we I don't know. That's something that frustrates
Now we're
me.
getting into built environment, which I'm sure you didn't like sign up for when brought me on. But this is what happens when you bring a politics nerd onto a podcast.
I love that though. It's just we brought you on to talk about VTubers and instead we're talking about culture and I love
um,
that.
yeah,
That's the cool thing about this.
Yeah.
All right,
Get you a man who could do both.
let's hop into the questions now then.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
don't get too tangential because once you get me on a bender then I'll just go for a mile. So you kind of gave us a little bit of insight, but the question was, how long have you been involved with journalism, and what originally made you interested in it? So
Okay.
we've talked about
This is
how long you've been in it. Let's go a little bit deeper.
Yeah, okay. So this is actually a very interesting story, and I do tell it a lot to basically anyone who asks, which isn't many, but you know. I started out in journalism in 2016.
Mhm.
I was still in high school at the time, and the reason I started out doing it was because my English grade was terrible. Like, I was failing English at the time. I just didn't enjoy the subject. Wasn't like enjoying the books that we were reading and the analysis that we were doing. It was all kind of like, why are we bothering to do this? So as an effort to lift my English grade in time for our like university entrance exams,
Mhm.
I started writing about things that I genuinely enjoyed. So I started doing journalism focusing on sports, specifically road cycling. So like Tour de France,
Gotcha.
that kind of stuff. So I covered like local races from where I lived in WA, national races in Australia, and I also did some stuff like internationally as well. I didn't like travel, but I would write about them from my bedroom at home. And I started that like in the lead up, probably a couple of months out from like our final exams and our university entrance exams. And I went from the lowest grade in my English class to the highest grade in 2 months, because I just, through journalism and writing about things I was passionate about, I found a joy for writing and analysis. And so that was when I started doing journalism, and I did cycling journalism for about 18 months. It was a bit hard to keep up during uni, especially first year uni. I was studying law at the time, and then I dropped out of law because I just wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't. I thought I was like dead set on like being like a lawyer, especially in like human rights and international law. But I got into the course and I realized, man, I don't like, this is not where I want to be. I really enjoy telling stories. I really like enjoying being on the other side of the fence. So I went and changed my major from law to journalism. And I was just plodding along doing my degree for a little bit, until May 2018. So this is about 18 months after I started doing like cycling journalism. At this time, I'd kind of fallen off the horse a little bit. I hadn't done much writing in the last 3 months or so. And someone randomly DM'd me on Twitter, someone by the name of Reese Perry. And he was at a publication in Australia called Snowball Esports. He was like a two-man thing, him and a mate. And he was like, hey, you're not a total shithead on Twitter. Do you want to come write for us? And that was literally the passing grade, was like, I was not an asshole. And I was like, sure, like I really want to get into more writing. I really enjoy doing esports stuff. Let's do this. And so I went and joined Snowball Esports in May 2018. And that's when I really started going ham into journalism full time. Obviously, that was a freelance gig. We weren't getting paid. It was completely volunteer. I was still studying full time and working as a barista for 25, 30 hours a week. So in essence, I was doing 3 jobs.
Gotcha.
And I guess from there, like, I decided that I knew that journalism was never going to be my full-time career. I had career aspirations beyond journalism for my long-term future that I actually have achieved. And it's actually the line of work that I do now. And I do journalism as a hobby.
Gotcha.
But across like university, journalism was a great way to earn money and get paid more than I would get working hospo or retail.
Yeah.
And have a lot of fun with it. So I pushed through it through university. For my 6 years at university, I was working in journalism for 5. I did like freelance stuff. I got to travel. My first international trip was I did the Overwatch World Cup 2018 in Bangkok. That was just after my 18th birthday. I did BlizzCon in the same year. I did South Korea for Overwatch, and then League of Legends later on. I went to Montreal for Rainbow Six, and like I did all this travel and all this great stuff, just writing about esports for various publications. I started out at Snowball, just at Snowball. I did some dabbling in some other Australian publications as well. Did some stuff for Kotaku. I went to .esports for my first paid gig in February 2019, and then in August 2019, I got my first full-time job at Vshojo, and then basically never looked back. So yeah, that's kind of like the whole journey through journalism. But what originally made me interested was just an innate desire to not fail English, because if you fail English in Australia, you can't get into university, or you have to take extra tests to get into university.
Oh.
And then the second thing was just like, I've always been an innate storyteller. I really enjoy telling other people's stories and like chatting to people and trying to just like distill it down. It's something that I get great joy out of. I don't think there's a better feeling than interviewing someone and really giving someone the time of day to just tell their story. I think people really genuinely like that, to just be heard and have their story told. And the rewards of that, and seeing them like overjoyed in an article that you wrote, or like relief that you told their story if they've had a bad time. That's a dopamine hit that I can't get anywhere else.
And I feel like we got a big example of that. What was it, a day or two ago now?
Oh, with the Connor story, the Connor and Ironmouse story. Yeah, that would be.
Yeah. That was,
Oh my
that was
gosh.
insane. All I see is big news or big article about to drop, and I'm like, oh shit, I gotta see this. And then just all of a sudden it's like, oh.
Yeah, it was that is probably like the biggest article I'll drop this year. And is one of like it's like one of the like portfolio pieces for like my entire 7 years in journalism so far.
That was sick.
I don't think it's the best one, but like I think it's up there. And like that was something that was like 6 months in the making. So I've interviewed Mousy before. I interviewed her around this time last year. It was late May 2022. I interviewed her for the first time, and then we released articles in like July. And then an opportunity came up to interview Connor. And someone else at Vshojo got first bite at the cherry, and Carver did a wonderful piece about Connor's cyclothons and all that, and had a wonderful chat with him. But I reached back out and I was like, hey, let's do something different. Do you reckon we could coordinate the schedules to get Mouse in, and like we can interview Connor and Mouse at the same time? Coordinating schedules between one of the world's biggest VTubers and someone who is part of one of the world's most popular podcasts is a very difficult thing, especially when they both have careers outside of it. So it took us 6 months to find a time that worked. Happened to be the most it was like 4 months of silence, or like 4 months of like, sorry, we're still trying to coordinate this. And then it was like, bam, like 3 days out from recording day is like, all right, we have this date. Can you make it? And this was while I was booked to be on holiday. And I was just like, really? The one week that you have sniped is the 1 week that I am on holiday. And I wasn't technically on holiday. I was just visiting family back home for my birthday, and I was working technically. So I found a quiet corner in the office and did this 45-minute interview with them, and yeah, the rest is history. Like it's like the two of them in that piece were just like electric. I remember the first time, and I am pretty open about this. The first time that I interviewed Ironmouse, it was different from what I expected. She's lovely, and she gave like very thoughtful answers. It was just a little bit unfortunate because she was fresh off of her stream when I first interviewed her. It was a long stream. She had a big day, and she was just a little bit tired, right? And that's fine. I get that.
Fair.
Like, streaming comes first. The content, like my stuff, comes second, and like, not everyone's gonna be at 100%, especially someone like Mousy.
Exactly.
But in this stream, the energy was just electric. It was 45. The way I've described it to people, it was just 45 minutes of pure diabetes. Like it was just so sweet and wholesome. The two of them have an insane chemistry that is just like unlike any that I have seen in content creation teams. Period. And I've interviewed a lot of content creators who are part of like duos or trios or bigger stream teams, and the way they bounce off each other was just like unlike anything else. And I knew that at the moment I got out of that interview, I was like, this is the best interview I've ever done, period. I've done numerous interviews. I've done hundreds, probably close to 1,000 across 7 years. And this was just like the piece. Like this was just like the pinnacle of all of that. And
the piece de resistance, if you will.
yeah, and I like, I mean, I'm biased, right?
Yeah.
I think it's probably I think it's probably the best bit of VTuber content that has ever been produced, like period, in terms when it comes to news content. I think it was like a very major grab. To be the first person to tell that story from their perspectives together in a call is a very big honor. And the two of them are just lovely people. And I think that really shines through in this story.
It's so cool. It's like I almost get like secondhand overexcitement just from hearing you talk about it. I feel like no,
I mean, it was an exciting time. I remember, because you spoke about this before we went live, but like you have in this space, you have those like one or two friends that you vibe check with.
Yeah.
And like you're like, oh, I'm doing this thing. Like, what do you think? What should I do? Even if it's like, not if it's like NDA'd, right? But like, you know, if it's like something that you don't want public, like, but you still want to vibe check it and just make sure you're approaching it right. Like, it's important to have those friends, and I have two of them. I went to both of them about this, and I just literally couldn't contain my excitement. It was just like, I don't think there's been very few pieces in my life that I've been more excited for. And I was super nervous. I don't think I've actually been more nervous for an interview in my career before leading into that interview. I've interviewed like, I mean, you're a League player, right?
No,
you know,
I've
you
never
don't know
played League. Actually,
Ah.
that's a lie. So I've played League once.
I mean, like, okay, so like, even if this will resonate with some people who might watch the VOD or like are in the audience right now, is like, I've interviewed Faker. Faker is the best esports player of all time, period. Korean League of Legends Pro, won 3 world championships in League. Unkillable Demon King is his nickname. Wildly lauded as a god in every single gaming circle, period. I interviewed him. I was less nervous for that interview by 1,000,000% versus the Connor and Ironmouse one.
Well, and I feel like that kind of not only is it the personas that you're talking to or the people that you're talking to, but also like that topic that you talked about, I wouldn't say it's hot, but like it's also, I feel like, a very closely guarded secret almost to them, like some of the things they might be talking about. So you want to like ask the right questions and not say the wrong thing.
I wouldn't say it's like a secret. I would say you wouldn't want to proliferate the misconceptions people like want to say.
Gotcha.
Like, I guess like in the case of Connor and Ironmouse, it was like you don't want to proliferate the boyfriend girlfriend stuff, right?
Yeah,
like
exactly.
when people like really try to read into their relationship. And like you don't want to proliferate like some of the toxicity that comes around VTubers collaborating with quote unquote flesh tubers, especially if it's mixed gender.
Gotcha.
Right. So like there's a very conscious thing like when you're doing those stories and trying to tell them, but I think a lot of it comes from the fact that no one is telling these stories. Like the reason why I guess I am quote unquote the VTuber journalist is I am probably one of the only people that has A, the tools to reach out to people, but B, the willpower to.
Yeah.
And like the
And
desire to. Like the fact that I work for a publication like Vshojo and say like, hey, I'm doing this interview for Vshojo is like a huge draw versus like, oh, I'm just doing this by myself and like I have 300 subscribers on YouTube, right?
yeah.
Like the fact that it's like in that way it's transactional. Like they're getting their story on a major platform that's read by millions of people. I'm getting to interview great people and tell a great story. And it's just a perfect marriage of like the skills that I have and the opportunities that I have and being able to tell that story.
Yeah. I can't even fathom or like attempt to understand what's going on there. So I want to cut myself from saying too much for sake of saying the wrong thing, if you will. But like it's just it's crazy to me. Like
Yeah.
this is why I had that secondhand nervousness. I feel like because you're so knowledgeable. You've touched all these topics. You've talked to all these people, but the biggest thing about you, and I hope that this means something when I say it, is how humble you are. Like I respect that so much. Like this is something I was talking to my friend about. Is like there's a question that's going to come later. I don't want to preface it too much, but like the fact that you just straight up said, I'm happy that you're asking this, instead of like, are you trying to like undermine me or what have you? It's like, you respect the grind in every way, shape, or form. If you
yeah. I mean, it's because I've been there from like, I know what it's like to be grinding from low, and like I don't want to say the bottom. I have come in from a very privileged position, and I have come in from a fact of like I got very lucky. If Reese doesn't DM me, I probably don't get into journalism, for example. So if Reese, I bring up his name. I was the best man. I wasn't the best man at his wedding. Sorry, I was the MC of his wedding last year. It was very funny. But like that was a friendship that was forged purely because he reached out to me and was like, hey, you're not a dickhead in my mentions. Do you want to talk about esports with me? I'm like, sure. I'm more than happy to. But like that also came off the back of like work where I started up my university's esports club, for example, which then became the biggest student society on campus. Right. And like it comes off the back of hard work, but it also comes off the back of like very lucky timings and just throwing my hat in the ring. Like I am someone who works myself to the bone. I joke that I would use work as a coping mechanism. So it's like whenever I'm like feeling bad or like something's going wrong, I use work and I just bury myself in work to deal with it. And like as much as that's bad, it has presented me with a lot of opportunities because I've tried to work to put myself in those places. And I'm very fortunate that for the most part, a lot of them have paid off in my favor. I've taken a lot more wins across my time than I have L's.
And there's some people in the chat right now that are telling you work too much.
Yeah, Netia, Fury, yeah, I know that I work too much. Just
but
let
I mean,
me be, okay?
that's kind of the creature of journalism too, is like you can't not work too much, I feel like, because you do kind of have to be ahead of the game, like we said before. I feel like, and you can't be running behind as a publication or a journal. I'm gonna start saying journal just because you say it so much.
Yeah, journo is the Australian shorthand for journal. It's so nice, right?
Yeah, it rolls off the tongue better.
The way that I see it, right, is like, I know that you're like talking about like, oh yeah, it's like, you know, like hard work and it's like long hours. It's like, yeah, like I was working when I was at the Vshojo, and this is not like to like flex or anything, it's to show you the realities of the job.
Yeah.
Is like, I started at the Vshojo when I was 18. And I was working pretty average. To start off, it was like, you know, pretty normal, like 37.5 hour, 40-hour weeks, the same that you would have in like a normal salary job. There were weeks where I was pulling at the end, it became more common to work 60-hour weeks than it did to work 40-hour weeks. And there was weeks and months of stretches of time where I was working 80 plus, 100 plus hours a week. And the
Jeez.
reason for that isn't necessarily because I'm a workaholic, because I am, or like I was being pushed to do that. It's because journalism as a field invites people who have like just innate curiosity.
Yeah.
And the thing is a lot of that stuff and a lot of those hours that I put into work wasn't because like I was working. It was because I was curious about something and then so happened to produce something alongside it that was work related. And it's the reason why I still do journalism to this day is because I have an innate curiosity. And if I have a question, like to use the same article as an example, what's the relationship between Connor and Mouse really like? Or like, what's that dynamic like? Instead of me just wondering, I can go and ask it. I can go and try and put myself in the position and email the managers and email the right people and be like, hey, I want to tell this story. I really want to learn. I really want to know. I'm very interested. A different example, I guess, is, and I think this is probably one of my proudest pieces that I've ever done, is I did a very, very big feature last year on trans VTubers and the experience that trans people have in the VTuber community and why VTubing is both a very powerful tool for trans people, and also the community can be kind of a curse for them. And like we wrapped that all up into an article. And across that time, I interviewed 14 trans VTubers in the space of a month. And it was like a massive, massive effort. The transcript of the interviews alone was more than 20,000 words, which is like the longest transcript I've ever had. It was something like 7 to 8 hours of interviews. And like the reason that article existed was because I wanted to learn more about the trans community and I wanted to learn more about the trans VTuber experience and tell their story in a way that was true to them and in a way that was, I guess, refreshing in like the modern gender discourse where trans people are very much the target of a lot of ire. And like, but that all started because I was just curious and I wanted to learn. And that is literally the story of a lot of my features is like, I want to learn about something. And instead of me thinking about learning about it, I go out and I try to ask the questions. And journalism is a field that very much invites that.
I love to hear it because it's like, so something I talked about with one of my friends beforehand is I almost feel like not to even speak to your experience, but I almost feel like that's what I've learned about myself through my VTuber career, through the short stint that I've been through, is and a lot of people are seeing this as I move forward with content. Like I used to play a lot of Apex, and like I told you, that was all I did was just go again, go again, go again. But then I realized over time that it's like I like learning things more. Like these kinds of streams, these kinds of topics are so fulfilling, and I can end stream feeling exhausted but so happy versus like dumping all my energy into Apex because I'm just doing horrible that night and now I'm ending depressed. Instead, I can end stream or I can end this video edit and be like, yo, there's a cool resource out there. Like I do have one video out there that I genuinely hope is helping a lot of people. It's sitting at almost 12K now, I think, which is pretty cool. But it was really to like, I talked to one of my friends, Yam Kamori, who's, if you haven't checked Yam out, you need to check Yam out because Yam is so smart, so curious, so cool. But like we really tried to focus on helping people rather than just talking to people for content or talking about a topic for content. Whenever I do something like this, I want to learn something, but I want to be able to share the knowledge as opposed to just creating content out of it. So I really like hearing that that's kind of the perspective that somebody in journalism has, because I feel like that's where
Yeah.
my brand is slowly heading.
I mean, people see journalism differently. Like, people get into it for different reasons. Honestly, if you're getting into journalism for fame or money, you're getting into the wrong career. Please, like,
Yeah.
just don't. It is notoriously underpaid, very long hours, and instead of fame, you get death threats. So that is a very common experience. As much as I hate to say it, but like, journalism is a very unique job. Like, it is like, you get to bring together so many different things, and I mean, the way that, if you like to see it this way, you literally get to write history. Like, that's
Yeah.
the journalism today is the history of tomorrow, right? And like, you get to learn so much and become this like jack of all trades kind of person, which I've always really liked. I've always just like learning things that I don't know, and journalism gives me the excuse to go up to someone and ask.
Yeah.
Which is something I really appreciate. And I feel the same whenever I like produce my own content, when I'm like, oh, I've just finished off like this recording of Behind the Model or something, or I've just finished up writing this interview, and it's like, man, like, I have something to show for this, and like, I'm really proud of it, and someone's probably going to read this and feel really good about it, or like, someone's going to read this and like understand something. And like, if it goes out to someone and it's like literally one person like takes something from an article that I wrote, then it's like, that's a win. That's a dub.
That's something that I've always lived my life about. Is I've always run under the mindset of, if I can make one person smile, then I've achieved my goal kind of mindset.
Mm.
If I can teach one person one thing, then I've achieved my goal. I feel like as long as people keep those goals attainable like that, then it's so rewarding, versus, like you said, I'm going into journalism because I want to make a bunch of cash. No, 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 no. No.
Please just do literally anything else with your life. Just do anything else with your life. You'll earn more money. Like, people don't get into journalism to earn money. It's a very notoriously underpaid field. Which is, I mean, there's like a whole other discourse of like, journalism being underpaid is why there's so much misinformation and disinformation out there nowadays. Yada yada yada. That's its own hive of like discourse. But a lot of journalists that I speak to get into it because they're interested in telling stories. They're innately curious. They're an expert on something and they just want to share it with the world. And the way that they can do it is through their writing or through their videos or through their podcasts. And like, it's that's a very special thing. And I really cherish that kind of relationship with content, where it is like, there is definitely content out there that's meant to be entertaining, like streaming. But I think there is something very special to me and something that I really like about content that tries to be informative and inquisitive. And that's why I do what I do.
Which is kick ass.
Mm.
But before we get too tangential, let's hop on to some more questions, because we're just gonna nerd out about this stuff.
Yeah.
I
I can talk about media like all day and like the intricacies of it. So yeah, keep running down the questions.
So next question, that I don't think we've talked about a ton yet. But what do you think led you into the transition of writing more about VTubers, or your interest in VTubers altogether?
Well, the person that is directly related to this has woken up and has now appeared in chat. So hi, Snow. So what led me into like VTubers was, I mean, pandemic. It was pre-pandemic when I first learned about VTubers. Mostly through my personal art account, where like a lot of the Japanese artists that I was following started drawing like Whole Life Gamers and Pekora and like all those, and even like Niji Sanji, so like Kane and Kuzuha. And they're like cropping on my feed. I was like, oh, like, you know, this is a thing. I mean, I still am a massive Vocaloid fan, so I was like, oh, like, you know, this is people being able to like bring the Vocaloid to themselves and bring themselves to life in that way. But Snow was like really, really into VTubers from like before Guru debuted, so like before Hollow Myth, which is I think like a bit of like a watershed moment in like the EN community is like, were you into VTubers before Myth or after Myth? Like, you know, that's kind of like the two times. And at the time, I didn't really get the appeal of like VTubers, but I also was not someone who liked watching streamers anyways. I covered streamers for my job, and I knew about the streaming landscape, but I never like would sit down on my couch and watch a stream or sit down at my computer and watch a stream, even if it was like alongside what I was doing already. I was very much just like chuck music on in the background and play video games kind of guy. And I mean, to this day, I still am. I do say this to everyone that I kind of come across that is like, I still don't watch VTubers. I don't watch many VTubers. The only VTubers that I watch are my friends, and I watch them because they're my friends, not because they're VTubers. And so what got me into the VTuber space to actually start writing about it though, was like, we were covering streamers at Vshojo, and I saw a part of the streaming subculture that no one else was really tackling at the time. All our competitors weren't covering VTubers, and I basically pitched to my then boss and his boss, because I wasn't managing editor at this time. So I pitched it to Isaac and Tom, that, hey, VTubers are kind of like growing. Can we like try out some articles? Obviously, like we could see like SEO wise that VTuber search trends were up there and like all that kind of stuff. And like we had the data and analytics, but we didn't have anyone who was willing to tackle it. So I started out late 2021, just writing some like evergreen pieces about like, oh, you know, what are these VTuber agencies like? You know, what is VTubing? And then it started like the same kind of content style that we did with like streamer content at Vshojo, which was like taking a clip, getting the excerpts of the clip and running a story out of it. You know, because streaming and having like public facing personas say stuff on stream is newsworthy. I'm going to be blunt about it. If you're a streamer, and you say something on stream, no matter like whether you say you want it on the record or not, like if it's publicly facing, a lot of people are going to take it. So like, you know, that's just something to be conscious of. Because I know there are definitely a lot of VTubers who are like, oh, I don't want like this spreading far and wide. It's like, well, yeah, that's a nice, honorable thing, and I usually try to respect that. But there will also be times where it's just like, sorry, like the public interest outweighs it.
Yeah.
But like we would take the clips and we would like write some articles about them. I usually tried to stay away from the heavy drama stuff. I've always tried to. I've never been one to report on too much drama.
Christ.
I'll report on it to be like, yeah, this is newsworthy, but I'll never put too much effort into it. I'd rather put my effort into like interviews and like positive stories. And I guess like when I kind of solidified myself as like a VTuber reporter, it was early 2022. I say early, it was around April. And I was like, I really think this VTuber thing is going to work. And I was like, we could see on the stats that it was working. Like VTuber content per article was one of the best performing sections on the site. And we could see that. And I was like, all right, I'm going to make myself the VTuber expert. I'm going to learn everything there is to know about it. And I'm going to start reaching out to people to get some original content. So I reached out to like all the major names that you could think of. Like I reached out to HoloLive, I reached out to New Sanji, I reached out to Vshojo. No one got back to me except Vshojo. Vshojo were the only people to kind of give me time of day. And I am very grateful for that. Because where the VTuber stuff really kicked off for me was off the back of my first series of Vshojo interviews. So like I interviewed Nyanas when she was still at Vshojo, Silverveil when she was still at Vshojo, Febe when she was still at Vshojo, Project Melody, which actually is never actually been released. That interview, sadly. Ironmouse, like I interviewed as many of them as they let me, basically, and that was what kickstarted me and the feedback to those articles made me realize that there was a very massive void in the space that I could fill, and that the people want this, no one else is doing it, I'm going to be the one to do it.
No, piggybacking off of part of that, do you, and this is You can answer this or you cannot. Completely up to you. Do you feel like Vshojo over Nijisanji and Hololive actually reached back out to you because they're a more EN outlet? Whereas, like, I
100%.
feel like I was gonna say, because I feel like even in 2022, like, uh, uh, Hololive and Nijisanji were kind of still, and I almost sometimes feel like they still are getting on their feet with EN content sometimes, because
It's
there's
not
not a lot of news around it. It's very
okay.
closely guarded.
So I guess when it comes to it, is for Hololive and Nijisanji, because they're JP companies,
Mhm.
very much a word of mouth. A lot of these things are word of mouth, right? And
Gotcha.
people knowing people. I don't have a lot of connections in the JP entertainment space. And so it's very hard to then bounce off and then make those connections inside these agencies that then lead to PR, that then lead to you being able to go and write articles about these people. Vshojo, I actually had a relationship with.
Gotcha.
No, it wasn't like a big one, but they
But
had
there
followed
was still
me.
one there.
Yeah, like they saw me starting to write VTuber stuff. They saw me cover like a few Ironmouse clips, like a couple of fruit clips and all that kind of stuff. And they like, I had the following of a couple of them, and they like followed me on Twitter. So when I reached out to them, it wasn't necessarily a shock. And a lot of the stuff that like leads to like these interviews is just like people knowing people. And so it's very hard. In terms of getting your foot in the door, very, very difficult. And that's why I reached out to so many people and just got like no reply. And that's fine. That's journalism. Like
It sounds very familiar.
there would be more. I have missed more interviews than I have gotten.
Mm.
I've had more emails lead to nothing than emails lead to even a reply. Right? So it's just part of the course. And you just keep going and you keep going and you keep persevering and you keep trying to find new ways to tell story. You go back when there's something new and you're like, hey, can we maybe do this instead? And you just keep going until you get the in. And then when you get the in, it opens up more ins, and then it opens up more ins. And so the reason why now it may look from the outside that like, oh wow, like, you know, I go from interviewing like big VTuber to big VTuber. It's not because like I know all of these people, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Frankly, I don't. But what I do know is that I know people who know people. And then like I have an interesting story, I have an interesting pitch, I have a genuine interest in them, and then I can go to them and they're willing to give it a crack. And that is like the very special thing that I have built because I was, I guess, the guy. You kind of just build those connections over time, and like if it wasn't for Gun, like without Gunrun replying to me and like being very open to me interviewing like the Vshojo talents and giving me like so much of their time, and also just being like very like free with how I covered them, he didn't really care. Like in like he trusted me to not do the wrong thing, and that's true. And that led to like, you know, some like big breaks for me, and from there I was able to like leverage more and more interviews, and then I was just like, oh well, I've hit critical mass now. I want to just keep reaching out to people and keep doing these interviews, because every time I do an interview it like explodes the site, so like, you know, it kind of feeds into itself. So yeah, that was kind of like the VTuber like journey for me in terms of like getting like into the space and like writing about it.
And I hope that this is something that does get taken away from this specific episode too, is really that, for lack of a better term, it's almost the Apex mindset, like go again, go again, go again.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like you're so good at it, because you're so used
I've been playing games competitively. Well, I've been playing like competitive games for more than half my life. I've been playing games competitively, like in like organized competition, for up until this year, basically.
Gotcha.
And like, so like 6-7 years of that, competing at like decently high level in Australia.
So you know
And
that
so like
there's more
I am
to
just
win.
like, I'm a very competitively geared person. I'm a very stubborn person, and I like, I will work for something until I get it. And it's not like I don't take no for an answer, but
Yeah.
I know that when a lot of people in this space say no, it's a no for now. It's not a no forever, but like I will try again in 6 months, and then maybe in 6 months they'll say still no.
Yeah.
But as long as there's new angles for me to tackle it with, instead of being and like something cool has happened and I can tie it to that, maybe this will then be the time that they say yes. And I like that's not to say like I'm this like very pushy person who is like in everyone's DMs being like, please, please, a crumb of content, please. Um, but I think it is that kind of tenacity that allows me to do what I do.
And I feel like without that tenacity in just in journalism or interviews or what have you, like you're not going to get anywhere unless you keep trying over and over and over again. And as
Yep.
long as you're, like you said, as long as you're taking different angles and you're not just, okay, well, this time they said no to this, so let's in 6 months talk about, oh, this specific happened, like
Yeah.
for lack of other ideas off the top of my head, but like maybe you reached out to Ironmouse right as her subathon ended or something like that. So
That's exactly what I did. That is literally exactly why I reached out to Vshojo, was because of Iron Master Subathon. Like, you've just hit the nail on the head. And I
I'm
guess
too
like an
good at this.
and then another example of this is with Hololive, I guess, is like
Mm-hmm.
I managed to get some comments from Yagu for an article that I wrote about Connect the World. And this is after I'd been trying to reach out to Hololive for more than a year. But I put it on and it was like, hey, Hololive PR people, are you willing to give me some comments about Connect the World and like, the success of the content and all that kind of stuff? And yeah, I got some comments, like, so it's like it's constantly trying to like look at the ways to approach it and look at the ways that you can tell the story, and there's always new stories cropping up in this space. It's not like, oh, Hololive said no to me, now
Yeah.
they're never going to speak to me ever again. It's like, well, no, it's like maybe it's the wrong time, maybe the talents are busy, maybe like the business is just busy, maybe the business just doesn't know what we do, maybe there's so many different variables.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of building up that trust and just trying and trying and trying and trying, and then eventually what I have found is I have eventually found success more times than I have not. I've been told, no, not now, but maybe, to so many creators, to so many pros from my esports days, to so many game developers. And then when the yes comes, you just take the opportunity and you run with it.
Exactly. So never give up, but do it with respect, I guess.
Yeah.
Is kind of like the quick response to that for people.
People really like talking about themselves. That's why I'm talking about myself so much right now. But people really, really enjoy talking about themselves, and they will take that opportunity to do so and share their story. You just have to be respectful about it. You have to make sure you value their time as much as they're valuing yours, and you have to give them the space. But at the end of the day, people really, really like telling their story and they like being heard. And so more times than not, you're going to get a yes. And the more times than not, you're going to at least get an opportunity. And obviously there's like some very big caveats to that, is like I have the backing of a very big publication. So between us, for example, I'm more likely to get the big names than you, for example. But that is also because I have built this up over 7 years, and I have built up like this credibility, these networks, these connections, these contacts over 7 years, to be where I am today, to ask those questions and be in the position to. But that doesn't mean that I look back at the first esports interview that I ever done with a very tiny Overwatch team here in Australia, and like weigh that any differelly to me being able to interview Faker, or me being able to interview Connor and Ironmouse, or me being able to interview any of the big talents that I've interviewed. Muselk, who is like one of the biggest YouTubers in Australia, I've interviewed him.
Yep.
I don't value that interview that I did with Jewboy and his tiny little Overwatch team back in May 2018 any differently than stuff that I've done now. It's all part of the journey.
Hell yeah. So the next question that I had, which we've kind of talked about through this expanse, What is your process for finding guests for behind the model or interviewees for some of your articles in VTnewsdrop, Dexerto, all that kind of stuff? I know that there's kind of, I almost feel like there is a little bit of difference in between the two.
Yes, there is a there's a difference in how I approach the two. There's a difference in how I approach every article. I approach every article
Exactly.
very uniquely and very differently. I approach every publication very uniquely and differently because they want different things. The Vshojo doesn't want me to bring on some. I mean, I would just say it. They don't want me to bring on some like VTuber who maybe only has like a couple of thousand followers on Twitch. Like they want me to come in and they want me to interview Shy Lily, right? Because their brand is big and they can justify that, and like there needs to kind of be some trade-off between the money they're giving me for an article and the views that they're getting and the engagement that they're getting, right?
Exactly.
The way that I kind of approach finding guests for all of my interviews is it's a bit different depending on like the situation, but a lot of it is just like the people that I find like genuinely interesting. Like if I've like followed you on Twitter or seen you on Twitter and you say something cool or interesting or like you go viral for some reason and it's like a topic that I'm interested in, I'll just DM you or I'll email you and I'll just reach out and be like, hey, do you want to chat about it? Or there's like the case of like I do an interview with someone and I was like, hey, like thank you so much. And say it's for like a specific topic. For example, I'm working on a Lutuber article right now. Like talking to adult content creators in VTubing. And I'm like, can you just recommend me someone else to like chat to? And then like you speak to someone, they're like, oh yeah, go chat to this person. I'll make an intro for you.
Gotcha.
So like that's kind of like the two ways of looking at it. Is the one process is just being genuinely interested in someone and the content that they do or the story that they have and just reaching out. And the second one is by a warm introduction where you interview someone or you know someone and then like at the end you just like you have a chat about like what you're doing and like usually it will lead to someone being like, oh yeah, I know someone who knows someone, or like I know someone who they would be a wonderful person to chat to next. That is kind of the process that I do for finding guests. There's obviously like a little bit of like other like things that go into it. Like it's a matter of matching up the right story to the right publication. It's a matter of pitching to my editors. It's a matter of a whole bunch of other reasons. But at the end of the day, a lot of it does come down to just reaching out and hoping that it sticks.
And that goes along with the go again attitude, I think, too, is just keep on trying over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Just being respectful, like we said before.
Yeah.
So, kind of tangenting off of that a little bit, I'm curious to know how you usually feel like you find information for articles, and would you be interested in sharing your processes? And like I said, it's okay. It's okay if you don't want to sell out your secret sauce.
It's not the Colonel's secret spice mix, okay? It's really not. How I find stories is I guess how I find stories is like I look and I'm like, oh, that's like this is like a cool person, or like this is something that's happening in the community. Let's chat to some people. How I then find the information to do the chat is a lot of Google foo.
Gotcha.
So it's a lot of like looking up stuff and researching. It's pre-interviewing, so it's like even if you just get like an email contact with them before you have a call, or even like an email before you do an email interview, which I rarely do. I do about 95% of my interviews over a Discord call. I would only say about 1 in 20 are over like email or over like Discord or Twitter DM. But like you'll ask the questions beforehand. You'll lay out the information. They'll give you a little bit of background, and that's really good for like trying to like finesse what you need of research. But a lot of it is like Google foo, looking up the right things. If you have like mutual contacts, you can reach out and like sometimes it's like, hey, how do you vibe with this person? Or it's like, hey, can you give me a bit of background on this person? That's really helpful when you like get the warm introduction. So like you can go back to the original person who gave you that warm introduction and be like, hey, can you tell me like a little bit more about them? There's a lot of looking up clips, for example. So for the Connor and Ironmouse interview, I just watched a ton of Connor and Ironmouse clips on YouTube to get like a vibe. And I had obviously passively soaked them up over my time in VTubing, right? But like you would still go out and consciously be like, oh, like what about this story? And what about this story? And like you would rewatch like the IRL streams and you'd rewatch the subathon clips and all that kind of stuff, right? So like how I find like the information is like it's a mix of how I get introduced. So like if I see something on Twitter and I want to talk about it, then the information is mostly there, which is handy. If I get a warm introduction, usually it's with like a background. That's also handy. If I don't have that, then it's just a lot of Googling. It's a lot of like just research. It's like no different to researching like an academic paper or like any kind of other research project, like a video essay. Like, you know, you do your Googling, you make sure that you get all the info that you need, you make sure that the info is correct. Obviously in journalism, that's a very paramount thing. And you just go in with an open mind. There's a lot of stories that like I have gone into an interview with and I know nothing. I literally just don't know. And truth and like I'm very open and transparent about that when I start the interview. But then the story builds from there, right? It's like, say, like I've been introduced to a VTuber, but I only really know them for one thing. Or like I've been introduced to a VTuber by someone and I literally know nothing about them. And it's like, cool, let's make that work. Right? So that's kind of like all these bits and pieces kind of make up like the secret sauce, quote unquote. But most of it, like most of the finding out information is just like finding out information that you would do for any other bit of content.
Hell yeah. All right. So next up, so here's where we get into some of the spicy questions that I was talking about. That I'm like, I'm always very cautious about asking some of these hotter topics because I never want to alienate myself from somebody so early on.
I like chatting about the difficult stuff. That's why I do what I do.
Exactly. So we kind of went over it as we've talked a little bit. But do you believe that it's easier to get responses from larger creators because of the company you work for? Or do you believe it could be possible for everyone if they follow the right process?
The answer to this is both statements are true. So both statements are true at the same time because it is possible for anyone if they follow the correct process. The correct process might just take years. Like that's literally what happened to me is I wasn't 2016, so 16-year-old me, at the time, I just turned 16, didn't all of a sudden, when I was starting out in road journalism, get to interview the winners of the Tour de France, right? I started out interviewing local cyclists in WA, and in Australia, and I spoke to like a couple of like cyclists from Australia who were racing over in Europe and had like some backing to them and some big names, and I was very fortunate early on to actually get to meet the two, not just but two world champions in road cycling, Annemiek van Vleuten and Marianne Vos, who are like two of the greatest names in women's cycling. And I got to meet them and interview them very early on, just by pure chance. But the correct process isn't necessarily like, oh, I'm small now, but I'm going to shoot my shot and get that interview with this big creator or this big personality. It's like you can do that and you might actually succeed. Like there's no harm in doing it. You're just probably going to just be told no, not right now, and that's fine. If anything, my story is to tell you is that no, not right now is probably a very nice answer to get because it doesn't, like, the door is still open. But the right process might be, all right, I've got to start from here. Like I've got to start from the bottom. I've got to do like my work. I've got to get recognized in the space. I've got to get recognized in the community. I have to make sure that I do quality work so I get into a publication which gives me more freedom to interview these people. And that's why I went from Snowball, which is a very reputable publication in Australian esports, but basically not known to anyone outside of Australia, and inside the very insular esports circle, to writing for .esports, which is a bit more globally recognized and one of the biggest esports and gaming publications in the world, to freelancing for Kotaku, which basically everyone in gaming knows, to then writing for Vshojo, which is a brand that is bigger than gaming, right? It's an entertainment, streaming, pop culture, everything kind of website, and it's millions and millions of readers. That's the right process. But then that also comes with the caveat of then, yes, it is a lot easier for me to get responses from larger creators when I can email them from my Vshojo email, right? I can go and like they can see that on my email it says Vshojo.com, and they can see in my email signature that it has my author bio and it has like my roles, which is like it says like former managing editor at Vshojo, because I'm not the managing editor now, but I was, and like and it says you can go onto the website and you can see that I have more than 2,800 articles published, and you can see like I've got all these big name interviews, and like you can look me up. And it is easier. It is a thing where it is easier to get responses from larger people because you just have the reputation. Like that's just it. And I feel like anyone who says otherwise is like joking. Like you are strictly lying if you don't say that like because you have a bigger platform it is easier to get bigger people. It's like if you try to argue against that, you're just lying. It is a lot easier for people like False, people like Cho to get traction, and if they wanted to get stories from bigger creators. I mean, like an example of this is there's a reason why False was featured in Ironmouse's 6th anniversary video. Like, you know, because he has those connections and he's built that up over time.
Yeah.
But like, you know, it is easier to get that response and get that fame, notoriety, recognition, etc., whatever word you want to insert there, because you are bigger or you work for a bigger publication and you have that like that leeway. I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. I'm not even going to lie. It's like I 100% use the facts that I work and I still work for Vshojo as a reason to go to interviews with specific people. There is no way in hell that I could nail some of the interviews that I do if I didn't work for Vshojo. If I hadn't worked for Vshojo, I hadn't had this better content. Which shows that, yes, there is a possibility that tiny-year-old me who was 16 and just starting out in journalism to get better at English can work towards interviewing people and the big people. But I'm 23 now. I've been doing this for 7 years. The process is not short. It is not a quick win. It is a long, arduous struggle. And you have to start when you want to. You have to start like when you have the inkling of an idea. You just have to try and seize it with both hands. And then like from there, it's like you just put in the reps, and then you'll get you eventually, if you put in the reps, you will get the break. I don't even think it's a case of if. I think it is literally a case of when. The when might be 2 years. The when might be 5 years. The when might be 10 years. But it is a case of if you do the reps, you will more likely than not get that like response from a bigger audience and from a bigger creator, and then it's something that kind of snowballs in and of itself. Everyone talks about the first big break, and that is very, very true.
And then once you've dug your heels in or you have that reputation, then you can build off of that, which is like you kind of said. I feel like in this space, it gets sugar-coated a little bit too much with the idea that anybody can do anything. You can do anything. You can, if you try hard 100%. Enough. If you try hard enough, you'll get there. Yes, that is a possibility, but it isn't
luck
just
plays
guaranteed.
A massive. Luck plays a massive role, but it's also a place of being in the right place at the right time with the right opportunities and putting yourself in the place to take advantage of those opportunities. And you don't get the chance to take advantage of those opportunities and quote unquote get lucky if you don't put in the hard yards and you don't try. Exactly.
Which is something that I'm glad we're hearing now, and I hope that it's kind of, I hope that it's shared a little bit more, because I feel like that like gentle coaxing is kind of what makes some of those stickier situations happen, if you will. As opposed to having already built a reputation or having already built a brand or what have you. So
and like for me, like I interview VTubers of all sizes, right? Like I've interviewed VTubers who have like a couple dozen followers on Twitch and a couple dozen followers on their social media platforms. And I've interviewed Ironmouse, for example, who has like 1.8 million on Twitch. But you just go in and you might not be able to get the bigger creator, but you might be able to.
and you don't necessarily know, but you can work your way up. Those are definitely a way of working your way up. It's just don't go into it thinking that like it's like going to be a quick process, because it is not. It is. I'm 7 years into my career, 5 years in games and esports and streaming and online entertainment and culture, and only now am I really starting to get like the quote unquote big interviews, but I still get more knocked back for more interviews than I actually get.
Yeah, which is just the game in of itself, I almost feel like.
Yeah.
So moving on, this is kind of tangential to, I think, but what do you believe makes your interviews and news articles different from the usual VTubers news sources?
Alrighty.
And where do you think these platforms can improve, or where do you think these news platforms could improve, rather?
This is a topic that has gotten me in trouble before, but like, I'm more than happy to speak about it because I stand by my word. This is very funny. Oh, let's just take a timestamp of this stream. So we are 1 hour and 29 minutes into this, so I can just remember that I can go look back at this. So what makes me believe that my interviews and news articles are different from the usual VTuber news sources? So like, let's lay out the ground here. So the usual VTuber news sources, what I like to call like the commentary types on VTuber news, is like you've got False, you've got Kyo, you've got Rev Says Des, you've got Penumbral, you've got to some extent like someone like Hero Hey, you've got Noxtaku, kind of
the harbingers, if you will.
Not really. And then you've also got people like Coefficient, Evan, etc.
Yeah.
What makes me different from all of these people? First of all, is I write. Mm-hmm. I'm a writer, and I do written word. I don't really, until this year, have done anything to do with video and anything to do with podcast. At least in VTuber news.
Fair enough.
I've done podcasting for years and years in different topics, and I've recorded at this point more than 100. But like, my VTuber content is very much written word. So that's like a one big medium difference. And the medium affords me like a little bit of a different approach. Like, I'm not necessarily beholden to the same algorithms and the same kind of need to clickbait content, I find. Because the Google algorithm on the Google search engine is different from the YouTube algorithm, for example. The visual element's taken out for one. So thumbnails are less important. They're still relatively important. SEO is different because like you have to nail the SEO in terms of keywords and all that kind of stuff. So like that leads to just some like content differences between them. What sets me apart though, there's a lot of things. One, and I've said this a lot recently, a lot of VTuber news is reactive. And so what I mean by reactive is a lot of VTuber news takes what has been said on Twitter and just rehashes it and like just presents it as like, oh yes, this was what's been said on Twitter. But I'm a news person, so I'm not like entitled to have an opinion, which is a fucking bullshit thing in my eyes. Like, journalists are human, we can have opinions. Like, please. We're not robots. And I think anyone that like presents themselves as high and mighty of like not having an opinion, like first of all, like you do you, like whatever, it's your content, but like for the people who want to have opinions, let them have them. Like, journalists are human. The second thing that kind of lays into it as well is because it's reactive, a lot of it is just the same shit. Like, and it's all like
it's recycled.
And it all becomes this space of, have you ever considered this? Literally every big VTuber news commentator is male.
Mm-hmm.
And so it perpetuates this kind of dude bro mentality. The only big VTuber journo, or not even big, but the only like VTuber journo that I am very acutely aware of is my friend Hannah. And like who's a woman, I should add on to that. Is Hannah. And she focuses, like, she's my podcast host on Virtual Recap, and we talk, she's like very, very, very knowledgeable on JP VTubers and Niji Sanji. And so, like,
because it has this dude bro culture, I think that changes like the topics that they cover. I think it changes the way that they cover them. I feel like that a lot of the news that I cover is a lot more inclusive. I feel like the way that I cover topics is a lot more sensitive. I am not I am not a drama merchant. I do occasionally have to cover the drama, but I am not first and foremost a drama merchant. And a lot of the news that I do isn't the reactive. I'm reporting on what, like I'm reporting on like what Gura said on stream, or I reported on like, oh yeah, these are some tweets and this is some drama that has happened. I'm going out and I'm interviewing people and I'm being proactive and I am going, what's the deeper story here? I'm going and telling the stories from the perspectives. I'm not okay. So here's an example. We can ground this example in something that happened very recently that I think is rather pertinent. VTuber Awards. And VTuber Awards shows have been the talk of the town recently. Whether they be Fillion announcing her awards show and then Takahata coming in and being like, oh yeah, like I was planning this as well, and then Ironmouse being like, oh yeah, I'm also planning this. And so like all of the commentary types at that time reported on just the comments that were said. And then similarly again with the small VTuber Awards, which was run by Petra Coral, and she did a phenomenal job on those. What those were like were how do I word this? Is like a lot of people for the small VTuber Awards only cared about the small VTuber Awards when drama came around, which was after the small VTuber Awards. And like people having the usual bitch and moan about how award shows are like just like complete circle jerks, basically, for a very insular community. The words were escaping me there. What set my content apart about that time? I interviewed Petra Coral when the small VTuber Awards were announced, and I was in like talking about it before the drama became the hot topic. In the case of the bigger award shows, instead of just like reporting on, oh yeah, Fillion's announced this award show for December, I went and spoke to Fillion. And these creators, all of these creators, have the connections, have the resources to go and reach out to Fillion and go and reach out to Mythic and just get a comment. But none of them do it. It's all reactive. It's all low effort. And I like it. Sure, it works. Like they've got a massive audience, and what they do, it fills a niche. And like obviously it works, and obviously there's an appetite for it because people still like watch them, and that's good. I don't necessarily want to knock that, but it is reactive, and I don't like reactive. I like proactive. I like going out, being inquisitive, and telling the story and getting a new perspective. So I went out and I interviewed Fillion. I went out and I interviewed Musashi, who is the CEO of Mythic Talent. I went out and interviewed Petra Coral, not once, but twice. I went out and interviewed winners of the Small VTuber Awards to get their perspective on the awards show. And I told these stories in a very proactive way versus just the reactive, oh, here's what someone said on Twitter and I'm going to present it in this way. But I'm not actually adding any commentary here because, like, you know, I'm a reporter and it would be biased for me to add commentary, which is bullshit because the way that you present news is as much of a commentary as anything you say on top of it. And that really got to me in regards to Hogwarts Legacy, for example, and how that was reported by VTuber people. And like these VTuber commentators where I'll just be truthful and honest, I was the only person to speak out against the transphobia that was happening during this time. A lot of the people presented the comments about Pikami and Silvervale and all that kind of stuff, and they just like left it there. And then like the way that they would frame the news was inherently transphobic, and I'm willing to die on that hill. My op-ed is still out there. But I went out and I spoke to trans VTubers about how the Hogwarts Legacy shit was affecting them. I went out and I made the comment and like highlighted the transphobia in the community where sure, harassment is bad and Pikami and Silvervale shouldn't necessarily be getting harassment. But also can we just realize the fact that trans VTubers live with this every day in us? Like, come on, like let's just like weigh up things. So where I see myself as setting apart is I don't just tell the news, I try to make the news. I try to go out and find the stories and be proactive and instead of just being reactively reacting on Twitter. And that's honestly where I think a lot of these news platforms could improve. False, for example, used to run like a Sunday podcast interview series. And I think it would be a great benefit to the community if you brought that back. I think it'd be great if there was like these bigger storytellers who have hundreds of thousands of subscribers on YouTube would actually reach out to people and hear their story. And that's coming from me as someone who has been on these shows before, been the center of controversy, been the center of all of these topics. when the Silvervale situation happened in August last year, when the Hogwarts Legacy stuff happened, when Vshojo tweeted out a video and they got the fucking VTuber names wrong, which was a ha funny, but then everyone used it to attack me because they thought it was me, even though I had left the company, at least as a full-time employee. Like, I have been at the center of a lot of these controversies, and a lot of the time is like when they present the news reactively, they misconstrue comments, and that is my biggest pet peeve with VTuber news. There are very, very few sources of VTuber news that actually present authentically. And like a lot of people will say like, oh, like I'm just like sharing tweets and like, you know, let me know what you think in the comments, right? Which is a great way of driving engagement and it has its own audience, right? But they don't actually lay out the story from start to finish. The only person that is big who has done this in a very effective manner, I think, is Penumbral. And I've had the pleasure of chatting with Penumbral a couple of times and picking his brain about his content. And I think what he does is like he for the most part he's pretty solid. But I am a very through and through ethics person. I'm a very through and through like I stand by what I say. And I am willing to be held to account, and I've been held to account a number of times. And sometimes I'll own up to my mistakes if there's been a genuine mistake, but also I'll stand up to my word. If like I've published something and someone doesn't like it, but it's right, I'm just going to stand by it. So that is kind of what I believe. I stand apart from the other VTuber news sources is because I go out and tell the stories, and I go out and chat to the people who are affected, and I go and maybe they don't go and chat, but they don't never share anything. I then actively share it. And that's where I think a lot of these platforms could improve their content, especially when it comes to drama. Because, oh my fucking god, I hate all the drama baiting.
Because I feel like...
There you go. That's my rant over.
Yeah. This room was hot. Shit just got hot. But what I really feel like needs to be taken, if anything, in like a compressed statement almost, is what I feel like you do is grounded by fact. What they do is just lighting fires with drama and rumors.
I mean, it's not necessarily that they're not grounded in fact. It's like they are. Like they're going in out and they're reporting on things that are being said and they're presenting what has been said publicly. And like it's not like they're out here like making fake tweets for people, right? But the thing is they only go halfway. They only go to the halfway, and they don't tell the full story. And because they only go to the halfway and they don't tell the full story, it proliferates the misinformation. It proliferates the speculation. It leads to people being attacked for things they shouldn't be attacked for. It leads to total misunderstandings. And that's where the issue lies. It's not the issue of the fact that they present the content. It's the issue that they only present the content and they don't actually do any of the research and necessary contextualization around it.
And this is the shit I want to see more of, because it's always drama baiting. It's never that's why I say drama versus fact, is because even though, like you said, it is still fact, it is still something that's out there, it's just they're not attempting to see what's behind it, like you said before, when they have a platform like, fuck it, I'll even say with False, where he has the resources to go in the background and talk to these people before just perpetuating.
I mean, he does.
Yeah.
He does chat to VTubers. Like, you can, if you listen to his stuff, like you know when he's like gone and spoken to someone about something. But it's like, I take this is such a like a nuanced discussion that I could go on for hours. And like if you are genuinely interested on like hearing more of my thoughts on this subject, go and watch any one of my virtual recap episodes with Hannah. We talk about all of this stuff a lot. But basically, right there. Yeah. Like we get really into the nuts and bolts of like how VTuber news is reported, because on that show we don't just talk about the news, we talk about like what is the news, why is it news, and then also how other people have reported on it and why that's good or bad. And like there are so many like little nuanced things about like why everyone fucking hates on Niji Sanji, for example. Yeah. And like why, if you go and watch a False video
or a series of false videos, or you go and watch a series of Kyo videos, or you go and watch a series of penumbral videos, you will see that all of the news topics presented are all positively glowing of HoloLive. They're all positively glowing of specific VTubers and their friends, and that's fine. I mean, I do the same. I'm behind the model. I get my friends onto an interview a lot because like I like telling their stories, right? But whenever a Nijisanji talent sells something good, you never hear about it. Like you never hear about like the Prism Cup that Salern is running. You never hear about Uki raising $40,000 for charity or Vox raising $40,000 for charity. It's just not that big of a story apparently. But at the moment that like I don't know, fucking something happens with a Hollow EM member, it could be the tiniest little interaction. Boom! It's like a 2-minute segment. It's like tiny stuff like that like annoys the hell out of me. It's the way that I see it. I'm trying to think of the way to like word this and kind of conclude it is like I'm not like some like moral deity that like everyone should aspire to be like me. I am human. I have fucked up. I have made mistakes. But I have accountability and I like to think that I'm transparent. And a lot of these people that have really big platforms do like some good. Like they do. Like there's been some genuinely good reporting that they have done. But a lot of the time it's just tiring to see comments taken out of context and it feels discourse, and also a lot of the reporting that they do is inherently negative. I've always stood by the fact that in VTubing and in any kind of news source, there is way more positive stories to tell than negative. And I have the categorical facts to show that positive news performs just as well as negative news. You just don't want to put in the effort to try and find the positive stories. And that's fine, I guess. Like if you want to not put in the effort and you want to get the easy grab because that's what's going to make you money at the end of the day and you need to put food on the table, that's fine. I'm not going to hate someone for putting food on the table. But then don't use what I do to try and attack me. Don't use what I do to try and attack the work that I do. And also just be honest and transparent that like, yeah, this is what you are. Like it's okay to say that, yeah, I report on this because this is going to get me the most views, or like, yeah, I report on this because it's what I know best. But there is so much positive news out there. There are so many really, really good, genuine stories to tell that honestly don't take as long as like editing a full like news like video, like some like a 20-minute news compilation takes. But they don't. That's not their brand. They don't put in the effort, and that's fine. But my brand is doing the positive stuff, and that's kind of what sets me apart.
Which we love that. Like somebody said.
I mean,
Ducky the goat, Ducky the goat.
I particularly like it, right? Like I think it's a good way of looking at things. Yeah. But you know, some people don't, and that's fine.
Yeah, I prefer seeing something like, we'll probably bounce to this since this is one of your most recent pieces, but I'd prefer to see a quality conversation with Ironmouse and Connor over the millionth episode where we hear, oh, well, this person said this person did this, and now this person's mad about this. It's exhausting.
So there was a particular, and this got me into some beef with, and I'm willing to share it. Like,
respect.
It's public record. So it's like, I'm not like hiding anything. When the Stream Awards were announced this year, and like there was a bunch of VTubers nominated in categories that weren't VTubing, which was a massive success for VTubing. It was the first time that like VTubers had been nominated outside of Best VTuber in an award show. Great. The false video that dropped on the same day in the hours after the Streamer Awards stuff gave 7 minutes, I think, or like 5 minutes, 7 minutes to, and size is not meant to be an insult here, but I think it goes to show the scale of the news, so I'm going to use it anyways.
Fair enough.
Gave 7 minutes to some 400 follower VTuber on Twitter having some opinion about how VTubers shouldn't be political, which is an opinion and a drama topic that is as old as VTubing itself. It is a topic that is not newsworthy. This discussion happens constantly. It is no longer newsworthy. Please stop putting it at the top. And this then sunset, like this was the like kind of like eclipse multiple VTubers getting nominated at a major awards show in topics and categories that hadn't been nominated before, and like a very major windfall recognition of the industry. And that the streamer awards stuff only got a 30-second mention in that False video. You can go back and watch it. And I pointed this out on Twitter. And I said, like, you know, like I'm disappointed that, like, you know, this False video, like, you know, like didn't highlight the streamer awards. Like, you know, I looked at the recording times when he was on stream, and like the news was definitely out there because I went and reported on it, and I had an article up before he even went live, basically. And like False didn't necessarily like that criticism. I won't necessarily rehash what he said, but he did say it in his Discord server, which I was once a part of. And I guess that really, that whole story, I guess, goes to show that a lot of these channels don't necessarily focus on what's good for the industry. They focus on what's going to get them like interactions and clicks and put money and food on the table, which fine. But then don't use that to come and attack my work. Like, if I can have a genuine criticism of like, hey, I get that, like, you know, VTubers like are talking about the fact that, hey, maybe should we be political? Should we not be political? Like, yeah, sure, maybe like a mention of that is newsworthy, but like we literally had one of the biggest award shows in online content creation give recognition to VTubers in a way like no other award show before it had done. And VTubing had been around for like 5-6 years at that point. Can we not just highlight that? Like, can we not just give more than a passing mention? Can we just mention the fact that, hey, multiple VTubers were nominated in these like different categories, and like, oh, look, like, you know, this is so good. Instead of giving it a passing mention, and then, I don't know, going and talking about HoloLive for 10 minutes, because like that's like a lot of what these channels do. Like, yeah, that's the kind of way that I see it.
Sorry for the silence. I was looking at
That's all good.
you haven't alienated me, I promise.
Yeah. No, it's just like,
Yeah.
I don't get to talk about these things much. This is why I get so worked up over them, because it's like, I have been a person who has been attacked by these people in this community. I like, you can go and you can Google my name, you can look it up on YouTube, and the first things that will hit will not be my interview series. It will be the shit that happened with Silvervale. It will be the shit that happened with Vshojo's video. It will be my Hogwarts Legacy article, right? Like, it will be all that stuff. And these people, as much as, and I don't mean it in like a way of like, fuck these people. It's just like, I've been in this space for 7 years. I genuinely have an interest in making VTuber news a better place. I genuinely have an interest in wanting to just everyone to tell good stories. And if you want to report on drama, I think that's fine. I think you can still report on the drama topics in a way that is better. And credit where credit's due. A creator like Kyo has massively improved in the way that they report on drama. Like, flat out. Like, if you go and watch some of Kyo's old videos to where he is now, he reports in a much better way. I still don't think it's perfect, and like no one's perfect, and there's many places to improve, but it's better. But like that's the way that I kind of see these things, and it's like, because I've been the center of a lot of controversy for some reason, and people taking my words out of context and my work out of context, and spreading misconceptions about me and misinformation about me. I'm just a tiny little bit more passionate about this stuff than most. Because my introduction to VTubing wasn't some like, oh, like, we're so grateful to have like a journalist and like these stories being told. We're so happy that, like, you know, these Vshojo girls are getting recognition. My introduction to the community was death threats and harassment over the fact that Silvervale, in a quote that she said in my article, said that Vshojo talents have more freedom than HoloLive talents, which I'm just going to say is an objectively true fact. And like, the reason they attacked her for it was like, the example that she used was like kind of iffy, but they then used that to attack me, attack Silvervale, send us both death threats, try to get me kicked out of the community before I was even a part of it, blacklist me, etc. And all the VTuber news people ran with it. My life was under scrutiny for days, if not weeks. And this shit still follows me to this day. So I know what it's kind of like to be on the flip side of the coin and not have the community support and not have that recognition.
and have my own work taken out of context, which is why I'm a little bit more passionate about this kind of stuff than maybe your average person.
Yeah, no, and there's so much validity behind it because you've seen every angle and every opinion. I feel like when you've been put under the ire of everybody around you. So I just wanted to put into perspective real quick that the ways that I found you are through Behind the Model and Fear.
Yeah,
They were never those negative.
Yeah, and look, the funniest thing is like I probably know the reason why you reached out to me. It was probably because of the envy and negative thoughts panel that we did.
I wanted to do it beforehand, but I'm like,
yeah.
So this kind of goes along with something we talked about beforehand, where the approach is everything. So I can reach out to you, I can reach out to Firo, and I can directly tie it to that subject. And we might not end up talking about that subject on the stream, but that's how I got you interested in even wanting to sit down and talk to me or Firo or so on and so forth.
It's a very good segue. And like the good thing about journalism is like good journalism just relies on those segues to like, be like, hey, I want to chat to you. You did this really cool thing. Do you want to chat about that? And then like you also add like a bunch of other stuff on top. Like, I totally get that perspective. But yeah, no, I get what you mean.
And it's just, I want to make sure that not only you, but other people out there, that you are being seen for the positive things you do. Yes, your name might be more highlighted under the negatives when you Google your name, but that doesn't make the person a bad person entirely.
Exactly.
The actions that follow getting hit with that is what really shows the kind of person someone is. Which, if you follow up with that and you just keep on trucking and keep highlighting the positivity around, then that shows that you're a good person over you reacting quickly and saying a billion negative things or something transphobic or something racist or anything like that.
Yeah.
It really shows the kind of person that we are at the end of the day in our responses to the negativity over just creating it, if you will.
After the Silver Veil article, I say this to a lot of people. It's funny because when I wrote the Silver Veil article, it was August 2022. So I hadn't even started my VTuber account then. Like I was still like publishing and reviewing under my real name. I hadn't even started my VTuber account. Didn't even have a VTuber model design at that point. Like nothing. And I say this to people every day. Is like I went through that experience. I went through that hell, and it was hell. Like it was literally hell. I've been sent death threats multiple times across my journalism career. Those ones hurt. Those ones really, really hurt. I still went through all of that and decided I want to go into VTubing further and dive deeper and like go deeper. And I think that like, I don't know, like you can say what you think that sees about me, probably insanity. But like I went through all that shit and I was like, all right, I still want to do this. I'm still passionate about this community. So that's where my heart lays.
Exactly. And that follows suit with what I think I said too with if you continue to spread positive, then the positive will shine through.
Yeah.
So Ducky, you're great. That's
Thank
what
you.
everybody's gonna say.
And you're doing
Ducky,
good as well.
Great.
God, if only people would. That was one of the big joys of the Connor and Ironmouse article. Was it was the first time I could log onto Twitter and know that I wouldn't be cancelled.
I'm glad that we can sit here and laugh about it more than anything, though, instead of letting that drag you down. And that's what is really inspiring to me, is just your VTuber journey here, but also your journalism journey, because you're getting hit with all this negative, but you're choosing to continue with positive instead. And constructive criticism towards somebody too. Some people construe that as negative. Fuck no. In my opinion, constructive criticism is one of the nicest things that somebody can do to me personally.
It shows that like people genuinely care and you want to like improve. Like
exactly.
It shows like the constructive criticism side of things comes from the fact of like, oh, I want to just genuinely make sure that like this is better. I want it to be better.
And that I think is a really good thing that gets overlooked. And like people take a lot of constructive criticism very personally, which like fair. I mean, I do it as well. Like it is human nature to take stuff like that personally. But like, I think it's very healthy to have these discussions and just lay it out on the table because like, I like to think I'm not some like big scary guy. And I definitely don't have like any ulterior motives for like why I do what I do. I just genuinely like telling stories, and I am also very passionate about the storytelling process. And if I think there is a way that a story could be told better, I'm going to say it. And you can choose to take that information on board and try it out. And if it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, that's totally fine. But like that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, and it goes along with what you said earlier, is that it comes from a more inquisitive mindset and a more wanting to put positive spins on things. And that's why I get so frustrated when I see things like you giving constructive criticism to False, like you saying those hard words to him and being like, dude, just do better. That's all you said, really. And then everybody or him are just, ew, that's a bad take. No, it's just do better. That's all we can ask for.
Yeah, it's like you don't have to take the info on board, and I'm not content policing, but it's like, I like to think that I have some level of authority here. I've been a journalist for 7 years. I've told countless stories. Even like the news VTubers, like even if they've been doing YouTube stuff, they've only been in the VTubing space for like probably like 3, maybe 4 years tops.
4, yeah.
Like I have more experience that extends well beyond that, and so I like to be able to, and I'm just passionate about news media, full stop. Like I'm just passionate about like how storytelling works in that way, so I will share my opinion and I will share like stuff like that. I've always floated with the funny idea of like doing like a VTuber version of like Media Watch. Media Watch is a show that we have in Australia, run by our like national broadcaster, where they like critique the media, including themselves, and like they're like, oh yeah, like this was an ethical mishap, or like here's like an error that they made, and like here's how they responded, and all that kind of stuff, like yada yada yada. I've always floated about doing the idea of like doing that, but in VTubing. But I feel like I'd have to be a masochist to want to just subject myself to that.
I mean, it's such a fun concept, but like piled on top of your work, but also the duel that you have with the responses that people make to the littlest things is just it's what stops a lot of like content from being created, is just you having to critique yourself prior to it, whether I'm ready stamina wise, or whether I'm ready to get hit with, oh fuck you, this is the wrong thing, this is a bad take.
The mental preparation, like I mean, I got a pretty rude awakening in like gaming and streaming journalism, like I had a couple of run-ins pretty early on, and like I learned from those, and like that's all you can do is like sometimes it's a genuine fuck up and you say okay, I messed that up, and you learn. Sometimes it's like completely illogical and you just like you go, okay, whatever, this is just gonna blow by, and most of the time it does. But like you learn and you always constantly improve, and that's where a lot of my critique and where a lot of my feedback on VTuber news comes from, and that entire rant comes from, is just from like someone who has been doing this for a very, very long time, who has a little bit of an issue with how people take things. And sure, like you don't have to take all the advice on board, but if like someone listens to this and they look at their own content and see how they can improve in that manner, I think that's just an inherently positive thing to have these discussions.
Now, speaking on constructive criticism, let's hop into some of our wrap-up questions, because that's really what those are always centered around, is just where can this be improved? How can I do this better? That kind of thing, which I feel like is something that's crucial, that's not talked about enough sometimes. And when it is, it's only the positive. I'm not afraid to hear negatives. I have the stamina and the capacity to take a punch to the chest and still be standing, if you will. But so this kind of follows suit with what we just talked about, because you've already talked about your experience with the VTuber community, so I'm not going to make you speak on it again per se.
Yeah.
But what is, if there was only one thing, what do you think that one thing should be, or what area is that could be improved, if you will?
In terms of how like the VTuber community like reacts to news content or produces news content.
Altogether, just the VTuber space in general.
Oh God. Where do we start? I know you said one thing, but like
I'm trying to trap you in one thing, but it's so hard.
I guess the one thing for me is I wish VTubing was more inclusive and accepting. I think there's still a long ways to go. VTubing as a medium is a very expressive medium. It is a wonderful way to equalize the playing field. It is a very powerful tool, as I mentioned earlier, for trans people. It's a very powerful tool for people with disability. It's a very powerful tool for other gender diverse creators, other racially diverse creators, and culturally diverse creators, to kind of be able to equalize the playing field a little bit and make content that isn't misconstrued by any unconscious bias. There is a massive issue in content creation period and influencing period where it is dominated by historically male, historically white, historically affluent, and economically privileged people. And like that's just the facts of the case. Is like the more benefits that you have in society as a whole, the more likely you are, and the more privilege that you have, the more likely you are to be a successful creator. And that is just like part of the fact. What I see the VTubing community do is VTubing on average performs better in this department. VTubing is definitely a lot more open to people with disability. Case in point, Ironmouse.
Yep.
Or gender diverse creators. Like look at VT Rainbow as probably like a great example of that, and all of their current and past members. But there is a long way to go when it comes for actual acceptance of diverse groups. And everyone that I speak to, especially those who come from diverse backgrounds, because I say this as someone who is like biologically male, white, had a relatively privileged economic upbringing. So I have all of these advantages. And I talk to people who don't have them. And I interview a lot of them, and I have a very big passion in telling the stories of diverse people. And they still face the same kind of inequalities, despite the fact that VTubing allows them to express themselves in a way that they maybe weren't able to previously. And I think that's a very powerful tool in VTubing when people can express themselves through a virtual model that like maybe represents themselves in real life, maybe represents an ideal self of themselves, or like represents something completely differently. But they still have an avenue for expression that's a little bit more equalized than other forms of content creation and other forms of expression, even outside of content creation. But there is still a long way to go in terms of acceptance, especially on the racial front. There is still a lot of racism that BIPOC streamers face, that the community still has a long way to go. So if there's one thing that I want the VTuber community to improve on, I think it's just being more inclusive to diverse stories and more accepting of people with diverse backgrounds. And that's a very big structural change, because it kind of goes against not just VTubing, but all of society. But I think VTubing does a pretty decent job of it, but everything can always be better.
I actually think a great example of that and highlighting that is your, not this week's Behind the Model, but your previous Behind the Model with,
With Leo.
Yes.
Arctica Leo.
Yes. I think that was, because I have a bad habit. I have trouble focusing, I'll be honest. So I skim content a lot, and just seeing like a couple seconds of the conversation, I'm like, shit, this isn't talked about much, and I'm happy that I'm finally seeing it be talked about. So,
yeah.
Hell yeah. What are some suggestions that you may have for people who want to start streaming / VTubing? Or even if you want to speak to it, journalism.
I should probably speak to the journalism side, because like I don't stream a hell of a lot, and I don't like I'm a VTuber, sure. I have this virtual model, right? But like, I'm not like a very traditional VTuber. I use this model to talk to people about journalism and do journalism. So I'll speak from the journalism bit.
Yeah,
Everyone always
that's
says it when you do these things is like, you just have to start.
Yeah.
And that's just always like the number one advice that you can give. I started with a fucking simple WordPress blog that I made myself, and I did the graphics all by myself, and I learned as I was going. And I've only gotten my foot in the door in so many different places because I just started somewhere 7 years ago. And so I guess I'll tailor the advice the two ways. So if you haven't started and you want to do this, then you kind of just have to make your own opportunity and seize it. Like, there's so many opportunities that are afforded to people now online. It's very easy to access. The barrier of entry is very low. You can go and take it with both hands. You've just got to make that first step. If you have already made that first step though, because I feel like a lot of people don't then talk about the second step here, is like, because a lot of the advice is like, oh yeah, you just got to start and then eventually it'll happen. It's like, if you want to get into journalism, if you want to be a better journalist, the number one thing that you have to do is be a better listener. The number one skill that you have as a journalist is being a very good active listener. You genuinely listen to what the person you're interviewing is telling you, or the community that you're engaging with is telling you. You ask questions based off following up, and you have a nice, genuine conversation with someone, and those genuine conversations lead to better content. I feel like a lot of the best work that I've done has been kind of unprompted. Like, it's just been like someone's gone on a tangent and we've dug into a tangent, and it's been that's been the story, not what I had originally planned out to ask. Mm-hmm. And so I think when it comes to journalism, I think that the number one skill that you can learn as a journalist, and it is purely just by rote learning. And it doesn't even have to be in a journalistic environment. It can be just even in a social one, is just being a better listener. Like, you just really take active listening on board and really try to practice it, because it is a communication skill that you can practice. Just listening to someone, thinking about what they say, and then asking the next question based off that, and then the next question based off that. That will make you a better journalist. That'll make you a better reporter. That will make you a better writer, a better video producer, whatever. Because a lot of that kind of active listening stuff, especially when you're doing these kinds of talk shows or podcasts or interviews, all relies on that. It all relies on the story that you're able to get out of the talent that you bring onto an interview. And the best way to do that is just by actively listening.
Which is letting Ducky go on long tangents of
Yeah, like, honestly, like it is like, I guess, like, it is like being okay and being open to tangents. It's knowing when to also stop tangents.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, if like things get a little bit off track, like, and like away from like the core like story, or like, because like time is valuable.
Yes.
But like, it is at the very least like being an active listener.
Awesome. So keep that in mind. Active listening is not only a skill that's super powerful in journalism or
It's
learning.
a life skill.
That's exactly where I was going. You finished my sentence for me.
You use active listening in every single relationship and friendship that you curate. The healthiest friendships that you'll have is when it's a two-way street. And that's what active listening, active listening is part of that. But like, it is like, you can have a two-way street and not be actively listening. But if you have a two-way street and you're actively listening, that's going to make for a healthier relationship with, whether it be professionally, personally, etc.
Hell yeah. So I'm going to skip the next question because we basically already asked it. I just noticed that.
Yeah.
What improvements or suggestions would you have for talk show format, streams, and videos? This is me stealing ideas.
Yeah. What I want to see out of, like, I'll maybe broaden the scope a little bit. Because in VTubing there's a few of these shows, and like there's a few like interviews. Like, I'm gonna just broaden the scope to like, what do I want to see out of VTuber interviews, and what do I want to see out of like podcasts and that kind of stuff? Because like there is that like that level of content. There's like people who do that, like VTuber Talk, etc. What I want to see from that is actually shorter stories. A lot of like what VTuber news is, and a lot of the gatekeeper element of VTuber stories is that they are quite hard to digest. A lot of the podcast content is like multiple hours long. I mean, this is included.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's like, it's good, and there's definitely an appetite for that. Everyone, like, there's a reason why, for example, Joe Rogan Experience is the biggest podcast in the world, right? It does have like a very big personality behind it, but it's long stories with interesting people. But the thing is in VTubing, that's not really a very achievable thing.
Clips are
I think
king.
it's still good. I still think it's very like fun to do the longer stuff. I do virtual recap, which we keep to around 90 minutes a recording. But I think there is a lot of value in doing the shorter content and trying to keep it brief and concise and something that people can chuck onto while they're eating dinner or making dinner or like that kind of thing. So like the kind of range of interviews that fall in like the 20 to 45-minute mark, where it's like a little bit shorter than a brief history, a little bit longer than a brief history, but not like a full-on podcast where we talk about everything.
Yeah.
That kind of period of like that length of content is something that not a lot of people do in VTubing. It's basically the primary reason why I started behind the model was because there wasn't necessarily that was basically the primary reason why I started behind the model was because you had, I guess at the time, and I guess now, you had people like Depressed Yuuki, who was doing like the VTuber history stories that were like 10 to 15 minutes long. And it's like cool, but like that's like all like based off of evidence that he researched versus like actually going and telling a story.
That I could Google, really.
Yeah. And then on the other side of that, you had like False doing the 5-hour news editing streams. You had him doing a podcast occasionally on Sundays that was like 3 hours long. You got VTuber Talk, which is like 3 to 4 hours. You've got John Loves Anime, who's like 3 to 4 hours. Coefficient, etc. Like all of these interviews and like even like Ironmouse's Speak of the Devil, right?
Yeah.
They're all like 2 hours plus, which is cool. Like I think it's like good, and like that's the kind. I mean, I listen to Trash Taste, for example. And like, you know, Trash Taste episodes are anywhere from like 100 minutes to 140 minutes typically. So it's like, you know, 2 hours give or take. And there's like room for those podcasts, but there is so many of them in VTubing. And like the reason why I started behind the model was there was nothing that kind of filled like the I'm driving in my car to work and I want to be able to finish the episode before I get to work. And I, you know, half an hour, boom, done. That's behind the model.
There's a difference from me being fine with having a video essay on the side while I'm editing versus your car drive to work is exactly where we're losing out, I feel like.
Yeah, so that's my number one thing that I want to see out of more VTuber podcasts and more VTuber talk shows. And it might not just be like the fact of like stopping the... It's not a case of if you're doing a 2-hour podcast, stop what you're doing and change it. It is a case of if you're doing a 2-hour podcast, maybe consider starting a second series that is a bit shorter and a bit more brief and a bit more structured, or starting a different or like if you're a new creator and you want to get into this space, instead of going for the 2-hour podcast, try for something that's a bit shorter. The big inspiration for Behind the Model was a combination of 2 interview series that we have in Australia. One is called 1+1. Which is done by the ABC. And it is like 25-minute conversations with like any, like, no, it's not even like famous Australians. It's just Australians with a very unique story. The one episode that really tickled my fancy, or 2 episodes actually, there's one with Maddie De Rosario, who is one of our most awarded Paralympic athletes of all time. And she spoke to Kurt Fernley, who is also one of our most awarded Paralympic athletes of all time, about like competing with a disability, and both like competing like on the track and in real life. And then there was a second story with the name eludes me, but with one of the cave divers that rescued the kids in Vietnam. So like there was, I think it was like 12 to 14 kids who got stuck in a cave in Vietnam. This would have been just before COVID. And 2 Aussie cave divers were the primary crew who got them out. And there was an interview on 1+1 with one of them. And those kinds of the ways those stories were structured and told is like a very big inspiration for Behind the Model. And the second one is also an ABC series called Conversations, which is a very similar show, but podcast only in 60 minutes. Gotcha. So like, and that one's daily. Like that's a daily show that they do. There's a few presenters, but like you just get these people on with very interesting stories and like everyday Australians or everyday people, and like the same kind of concept applies to just everyday VTubers, and like just getting them on and telling their story that you can kind of condense into a car ride or a quick chore run, and not something that you kind of have to split in and out of trips, like a longer podcast. That was like that was the big inspiration for Behind the Model, and I think like where I hope we get a little bit more content in the future.
Hell yeah. Yeah, no, I've noticed how much more structured and I feel like fleshed out, but I think that comes with experience too. Like you have all this journalistic experience that really helps you be able to zero in on topics a little bit better, if you will. So it's not a 1 day process. You kind of figure it out over time and you learn from your experiences. Now, for another fun little thing that I get to steal, if there was one creator you would like to see highlighted or on the show, who would it be?
I guess for your show. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, my number one is I'm going to call him out, and he's going to hate me for this. It would be Miko Katsuka.
I knew it was coming.
Genuinely great friend of mine. And if you watch the Behind the Model episode of him, he's got a very, very fascinating story, very, very fascinating background.
I had a feeling you were gonna say it, so I've already been reading up. I promise.
Yeah, so Meek is good, and I guess that's been the question a little bit. To turn it on myself a little bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, like Behind the Model is like a show and that I run, and also like there's beyond Behind the Model, I do like a ton of VTuber interviews on the side. I guess like for me, if there's like one creator that I would like to interview, I still haven't had the chance to interview anyone from like Hololive or Nijisanji. I would love that. I would really, really love to, like, for example, I would really love to interview Yuuki, Yuuki Violetta of Nijisanji. Would love to just chat to him about, I guess, being a queer creator in an agency and the kind of the opening acceptance towards LGBT creators in VTubing, and all the kind of charity work that he's done in that department. I think would be a very interesting story to tell. If we're going to expand it a bit further, this gets hard because I've actually interviewed a lot of like really like amazing people in VTubing, and like really big creators. Yeah, like it's hard to say like if there's like any one VTuber that I want to like interview that's outside of an agency. Usually it's like you can run through like the big list. It's like Fillion interviewed, Ironmouse interviewed, Shy Lily interviewed. Even like some of VTuber's members I've interviewed before. I've interviewed Mary for Astroline and himself. Like I've interviewed so many. I guess it would be like Shoto. I guess would probably be like the one like VTuber that like I haven't interviewed yet that I would actually really like to chat to. In terms of like a big creator kind of vibe. But the thing is the wonderful joy of VTubing is that there's always a new story. There's always a new creator who's popping up every day. There's always someone's story to tell in this space. And if I was to, even tell us one story a day, I would probably be here for the rest of my life trying to get through all the VTubers. And that's kind of like a really big joy. Yeah. And that's why I'm kicking around here for at least a little bit longer.
And if we're going to talk about people I want to interview, that I will scream his name until the day he says yes. Is motherfucking Doppio Drop Scythe. Call me up any day now, please. This is where we are. This is where we are different. I almost feel like because you have such like a fleshed out idea of what you want to talk to Uki about. I just want to fucking talk to Doppio about how he can keep such a high energy and just wonderful fucking personality, because there are very, very few occasions where you will see Doppio drop Scythe and not a just super happy like persona.
Yeah.
Obviously,
I think when it comes to the EN space, I think Doppio is probably the most unique VTuber. In terms of like in terms of EN agencies, he's an enigma. I feel like I never see him, and then like but like he's got this just like very dedicated core of a fan base, and he's always doing this like very like interesting and out there stuff, and I'm just like, man, I wish I understood you a little bit more. So yeah, I totally understand why you want to interview him. It'd be awesome.
Just because I know we won't stop smiling the whole stream. And also Fulgur Ovid, just so that I can make my friend super jealous that I interviewed their Oshi.
Yeah. That's the best reason to get interviews is like getting interviews to flex on friends. Been like, yeah, like you know that person you idolize. I spoke to them. I know them.
It's
This
not
is a
even
direct. This is a direct call out to Snow, by the way.
it's not even
Yeah.
entirely that though. I just love the energy that Fuchan creates.
But like at the end of the day, like this is maybe like a nice note to leave off for you in terms of like interviewing is like when you're like nervous about it's totally genuine to be nervous about an interview. And like when you're like interviewing these people and like you feel like these like parasocial elements like towards them in terms of like maybe feeling a bit closer or like all that kind of stuff is like or nervous about like, oh wow, I got like this interview with like this creator and like, you know, I'm kind of nervous about it. 9 times out of 10, or like in my case, it's probably like 99% of the time, the person you're interviewing is going to be shitting bricks way more than you. And so it is like a lot of my job is a little bit of like people management and making sure people are okay and comfortable. And I guess when it comes to like interviews, it can be hard. It's not an easy path, but it's a very rewarding one. And if you go into every interview just like thinking that you can kind of be the rock and you can let them tell their story in a way that's comfortable and kill the nerves, it's gonna the nerves will also fall off for you. So like yeah, that's a motto that I kind of take into everything.
Wait, are you playing off of me? Is it because I'm a rock?
Well, I mean, coming
The
into this,
irony.
I wasn't really like I'll truth be told, I wasn't nervous for this at all. It was like I really do enjoy telling my story. I don't get to do it enough. I mean, I wish I could do it more. I'm very grateful for every single opportunity that I get to, and I'm very grateful that you invited me on. I obviously love telling my story whenever I get the chance, in the same way that a lot of people love telling their stories when I get the chance to interview them. So yeah, I guess thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And you are welcome on anytime you see a topic that I'm talking about that you want to talk about, because your insights are astounding. So it's just I like
It's that
coming
inquisitive
into-
nature.
Exactly. I like coming into an interview and having more questions, if you will, that I'll probably just DM you at another time, being like,
Yeah.
hey, what's your opinion on this? And I like having those opportunities where I'm always thinking past it. I'm not just, oh, episode's over. It was
Yeah.
great. I love talking to you. I love keeping up with everybody and watching your content and stuff like that.
Exactly.
But when you leave me with more questions, it's not only you get to laugh at me because then I'm just always there, but at the same time, like you've made an impression on me that's gonna last for a very, very long time. So
Yeah.
hell yeah.
Well, this is treat this as an open invite. You're more than welcome to chat to me anytime.
Hell yeah. I respect that. I appreciate you staying longer than I probably quoted, since we
That's fine.
tangented a little bit.
It's fine. I put a window in because I've got my birthday stream in like in a little bit. So
Exactly.
I'm gonna go and eat some food and then probably get ready for that.
I appreciate you hopping by, but thank you so much to everybody who comes by. Make sure to check out Ducky's YouTube. Make sure to check out all of Ducky's articles that he's always pumping out, because they're kick-ass. I'll link everything below once the VOD comes out as well. But I appreciate you for stopping by, and
Thanks for having me on.